Great Reset. Conspiracy theory, says the World Economic Forum. Is it really? That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. And before I get into discussion of that, I want to quickly mention that you can get Bold and Blunt now at edify.app, the online platform for faith-based podcasts. But you can also get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are offered, including WashingtonTimes.com. World Economic Forum official says Canada has bigger issues to discuss than conspiracy theories. Adrian Monk responds to criticism, disinformation campaigns targeting the World Economic Forum. That is a September 2022 piece from CBC News. This is interesting to me because the left, for over 2 years now, has been trying to make the case that the Great Reset, which is an agenda of the World Economic Forum, to basically cripple world economies and take over the world with just having a few select elite governing at the top. Well, the World Economic Forum has been out making the case that this is all a conspiracy. Nothing to see here. Go home, folks. Go back to bed. Stay in your home. Wait for your stimulus check from the government and do as you're told. And then Klaus Schwab came out with his printed version of the Great Reset, basically putting in print what everybody was saying the Great Reset was about, which was, to put it short, to put it succinctly, it's just another version of the One World Order, the New World Order, or as Joe Biden likes to call it, the Build Back Better. It's basically a reshaping of the economies of the world to make it not so much a shareholder type of business model, but a stakeholder type of business model. So in America, what that would mean is American businesses go into business to generate profits for their shareholders or for their business owners. That is a shareholder version of capitalism. And so if consumers like your product or service, they buy your product or service and you generate profits. Very pure, very simple. If consumers don't like your product or service, they don't buy your product or service and your business fails. That's a clean, honest approach, a free market capitalistic system. The World Economic Forum's Great Reset envisions a stakeholder system of capitalism, which isn't really capitalism. And to underscore the idea that it isn't really capitalism, they turn to China and they suggest we mirror China's capitalistic system, which everybody knows communism is not capitalism, and communists do not support capitalism. And so that's a lie in itself, to turn to China as a model of capitalistic free market system. So clue number 1 is that. But then clue number 2 and 3 and 4 and subsequent numbers comes as you read about what a stakeholder capitalistic model is all about. And where can you read what it's all about? Well, Klaus Schwab, founder of World Economic Forum, has helpfully penned a book called Stakeholder Capitalism, a Global Economy That Works for Progress, People, and Planet. And he penned this book with Peter Van Ham, and in it, if you look at weforum.org/about/book, you can read more for yourself what stakeholder capitalism really is. But in short, from this webpage, what it is various stakeholders of an economy don't only look after their own interests, but that of society as whole, leading to a system of stakeholder capitalism. It contrasts to present systems where the interests of a single stakeholder prevail, such as shareholder capitalism or state capitalism. So what it is basically is a collaborative approach to running a business. Instead of a business owner being in business to run his or her own business, suddenly that business owner has to take on all these shared interests along with generating a profit, he or she also has to push forth a narrative that all these various interests express. In other words, it's like having socialists in charge of running your business. It's like having Bernie Sanders or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Rashida Tlaib in charge of running your business. Yes, you still own your business, and yes, you still are in business to make money, but at the same time, your business has a social agenda, a social justice cause that's just as important, if not more important, than making money. Suddenly, you have to push forward a Black Lives Matter narrative or a climate change narrative. Why? Because that's just as important as making money. Right from this page, ultimately, the stakeholder model Schwab suggests is one where government, business, and individuals collaborate, where longer-term planning for future generations replaces short-sighted presentism, and where better measures of success allow us to move beyond a myopic focus on GDP and short-term profits. In other words, read your Ayn Rand. Read Atlas Shrugged and see how that works. But this is what the World Economic Forum's Great Reset is pushing. One of the models it's pushing, ultimately feeding into the narrative that climate change must be addressed at all costs. And through environmentalism, through the various goals, the various sustainable development goals that you're familiar with, that the UN has been pushing for years now, decades even, through all these various goals, equality for all will be achieved in the world. That ultimately is the mission of this Great Reset. And of course, there has to be certain people at the top to ensure that equality is achieved. And that's where this Davos crowd comes in. That's where the global elites come in. They're the ones that know better than me and thee in how to achieve global equality among all the citizens. They're smarter than we are, so they're naturally the ones who are going to be at the top, ensuring that equality and social justice prevails. And what gets me is, even though you have Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, putting out in his own words what the Great Reset is all about and what the end game of the Great Reset is, you have people like Adrian Monk, a senior official with the World Economic Forum. His title is Managing Director, arguing that anybody who talks about the global movement, the global reset of the Great Reset, the global agenda to basically cripple world economies and subdue the ability of individuals to do business and achieve prosperity in their own individual pursuits, you have people like Adrian Monk saying that's crazy. That's just conspiracy. This is what he said to CBC's radio's The House in an interview in early September. Canada should be talking about a lot of things right now. It shouldn't really be talking about the World Economic Forum based here in Geneva. You know, there are bigger issues really for it to be thinking about. Stop spreading disinformation about the World Economic Forum, he says. Stop spreading lies about the Great Reset. This is what the writer of this CBC piece writes. The Great Reset has since morphed into a conspiracy theory claiming that a cabal of global elites is planning to remake society to eliminate private property and impose an authoritarian global government. Monk said the Great Reset is really just an idea that grew out of the pandemic when world governments were pouring billions of dollars into keeping the economy afloat. And here's the quote from Monk to the host of CBC Radio's The House. The idea was that we should also try and suggest to people that they think about spending it on the kind of long-term things that would aid climate change combating, that would help jobs, reskilling, and all the kinds of bigger long-term challenges. In other words, he says, nothing to see here, folks. Go home. The Great Reset is just simply an idea floating about. Just a nice idea to help people around the world achieve equality. Except everything that the Great Reset is exactly what the conspiracy theories say the Great Reset is. It's a top-down, mandated, forced government on the people of the world, and it's done in a way that those who rebel against it are painted as haters of humanity. It really is, if you look at the words of the Great Reset from Klaus Schwab, from the World Economic Forum, it really is a total top-down control of the world's population. The left wants to paint that as a conspiracy, but all you have to do is go to weforum.org and read the World Economic Forum's own writings on what the Great Reset is. Or you can just listen to today's Bold and Blunt interview with my guest, Marc Morano, who has written a book, a great book, called The Great Reset, Global Elites and the Permanent Lockdown. Just came out. Put it on your must-read list. Marc, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
No problem. Happy to be here, Cheryl. Thank you very much.
So the World Economic Forum just came out a few weeks ago with this statement that there are good reasons, or there are rational reasons, I think was the phrase actually used, to put tracking chips into children. What's your response to that?
Well, this is along the same lines as they had the head of, I believe it was Pfizer or Moderna, just on the same stage in Davos, talking about tracking surveillance pills in medicine to increase compliance, so doctors can monitor your compliance for taking these pills. It's the same concept as vaccine passports, track and trace to find out where you're going. And essentially what they're doing with the children here now is they're using parents' fears of kids, whether the kids are kidnapped, kids are any danger that might come to them, just like you'd have your dog chipped. They're treating children just like you would any other animal. And it's scary because a part of the whole Great Reset, part of the whole Davos agenda is the massive surveillance state. They not only want to know where you are, but they want to know what you're eating, who you're talking to, what you're talking about, what your medical status is. And this goes perfectly along with their agenda of tracking children and make them essentially wards of the state, of the globalist state, as young as possible.
Now, there are probably plenty of Americans who look at some of the statements and remarks and agendas to come out of the Davos meetings and summits and so forth and just kind of shoulder shrug and say, well, that's just talk. It could never happen here in America. But you just wrote this terrific book, The Great Reset, Global Elites and the Permanent Lockdown. And you know better, yes? This isn't just talk. This is an actual agenda.
What I tell people is this isn't 1990. We're not talking about George Bush's big speech. I think it was before the United Nations in September. Actually, it was September 11th, 1990, where he warned of the New World Order. There's a lot of, angst over that. And there actually should have been, because that dealt more with, the foreign policy, follow the Soviet Union and the U.S. Remember the old peace dividend we were supposed to get before all the former communists and everyone moved into the green movement, right?
Right.
That's what actually there's been a lot of analysis of that, where they all moved over and started promoting their version of economics, shall we say, through the green movement. But anyway, the Great Reset is here and happening now, and it's much like those mail-in freeze-dried seahorse monkeys kids would order back in the 50s and 60s. You add water and you activate them. The COVID lockdowns have activated the Great Reset, which Klaus Schwab didn't even utter the phrase Great Reset until 2014, and then they did all those slick videos, you'll owe nothing, you'll be happy, U.S. will no longer be a superpower, etc. But what happened with the COVID lockdowns, and I detail this in great detail, chapters in this in the book, is it brought all of this sort of global theory, global elites theory, into reality. So for decades, you had from the pages of the New York Times, Tom Friedman, the UN climate chief, Justin Trudeau, admiring China, all of these people, the Obama administration, praising China's one-party state, authoritarianism, no need for democracy, the messiness of democracy, China's doing it right on climate, China, I have great admiration for the way they get things done. This is what Justin Trudeau had said, too. So what happened was the once free West got a taste of one-party rule with COVID lockdowns. And this meant that every mayor, governor, could just literally become a dictator overnight. They got to invoke emergency orders. They didn't need no stinking democracy. They didn't need city hall. They didn't need town council. They didn't need board of supervisors. They didn't need state representatives. They could just impose, shut down businesses, cancel weddings, funerals, stay-at-home orders, vaccine mask mandates. It was a power trip like no modern politician, and I mean this, no modern politician by 50 years has ever got the opportunity to taste, and they don't want to give it up. That's why we're still living under a COVID emergency in the United States right now. Joe Biden keeps extending it. And here's the kicker. They are currently, Cheryl, collapsing our energy. People say, where's the Great Reset? Okay, here it is. They're currently intentionally collapsing our energy system, which has been in the works a while, but they've really accelerated, particularly just since Ukraine, but collapsing our current energy system. They're collapsing our food supply by going after now high-yield agriculture. It was only a few years ago that the UN did this nitrogen danger report about greenhouse gases in their agricultural report. So they're cutting down modern food supply at its knees, going after high-yield modern agriculture, the whole agricultural revolution that's been feeding the world since the 1950s and 60s. People like Norman Borlaug led the way. They're also intentionally collapsing our transportation system. Mandates that say you can't sell gas-powered cars. World Bank, Nicholas Stern came out a few months ago and said we have to stop, essentially put a timetable for the end of the gas-powered car. So when the World Bank is telling automakers that they're not going to finance it, automakers don't even have a choice. Australian Bank came out and said they won't even give car loans now if you're buying a car that has a gas-powered engine. So they're mandating EVs. What does that mean? It means they're mandating car shortages. This is taking a page from Fidel Castro's Cuba, where they're stuck with 1950s Chevy Impalas driving around because they can't afford new cars. And it's taking a page from East Germany, where people had to wait in line for 5-7 years for the crappy East German Trabant that was the only approved government car that you could buy. And that's what California's doing, 17 other states, including my home state of Virginia. Trigger laws. We're all following suit. The handwriting's on the wall. They've also collapsed the First Amendment with a corporate government collusion. Big tech censorship is government censorship. That's what people need to realize. And then there's a whole other tentacles dealing with digital banking, and as you mentioned to start the show, surveillance. So it's happening. It's here. It's now. Our lives are being ruled. Everything I just mentioned was not democracy. No one voted to stop eating meat. No one voted to stop driving gas-powered cars. No one voted for blackouts and shortages and thermostat controls. They were promised instead a green utopia with no pain that never materialized as they're shutting down our modern energy.
And here's the real frightening thing for Americans who think, well, I'll just get out the vote and I'll just campaign for people to rush to the polls and get rid of all the Democrats. The Davos crowd, the globalists, because of this feckless president we have in the White House, right, which is all the stars aligned for them to steamroll their agenda into America. Those powers have been putting in place systems that will defy whatever our election outcomes will be, correct?
Yeah, they have. Not only in terms of electoral monkeying around, but even just in terms of setting that agenda. In other words, even if Republicans sweep a midterm, oh, great, we're going to fight the Great Reset, we're going to... Wait a minute, you still have Mitch McConnell as your speaker, you have Kevin McCarthy in the House as your majority leader, and you think you're going to be able to do anything? I mean, you listen to the words of these guys. They were largely silent on COVID lockdowns, largely silent on vaccine mandates, silent across the board on basically the whole agenda of even climate. Kevin McCarthy will tell you climate's a problem. We need solutions. We need to invest billions in carbon capture. Yes, solar and wind are important. And they buy the whole narrative, and they go in, they come up with a version of Green New Deal light. So my point is we need to hold the Republican Party accountable and make it so that these mainstream politicians can no longer politically align themselves with this agenda of the World Economic Forum, of the United Nations, and of the World Health Organization, which now is, of course, pushing this pandemic treaty. I mean, Joe Biden is all for it. If that is not front and center in the next presidential election, whoever the Republican nominee is, basically it's going to be make the UN IPCC look like child's play. A World Health Organization pandemic treaty will literally give Bill Gates-funded scientists the ability to declare a pandemic, and then the United States, Western Europe, all these countries who sign on to it would be shut down, bans on travel, lockdowns, vax mandates, and you wouldn't have the outliers like Florida. They wouldn't be able to under this pandemic treaty. You wouldn't even have countries like Sweden if they sign on to it. You will be beholden to the ultimate group of essentially great resetters who are going to have that kind of power. So that's the problem. It's not about left and right. I have a whole chapter about how this is freedom versus tyranny. The problem is many Republicans are corrupt and rotten as hell when it comes to these type of issues.
What do you think is the most perilous organization for America right now? The World Health Organization or the World Economic Forum? Or is there another one out there?
Well, that's a great question. I think the World Health Organization, in terms of its ability to do damage, might be at a higher level, especially, remember, Biden was all set to sign the U.S. up for this. The reason we don't have a pandemic treaty right now is the developing world, concerned over sovereignty issues, deep-sixed at the last World Health Organization meeting. But as we both know, 1 year of failure by globalist meeting does not mean they're not going to try again and eventually succeed. Look at the history of the UN. But World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, isn't so much like, oh, they did this and now this is happening. They've been cultivating this for decades, and they've been waiting and waiting. They sponsored these dry runs, if you will, the pandemic response. My chapter details the 3 different ones that occurred from Rockefeller Institute 2010 to the World Economic Forum, John Hopkins, 2018, and one in 2019, and they literally played out how they were going to respond against previous epidemiological evidence, with mask mandates and lockdowns and even shutting down the internet was talked about in one of them to prevent misinformation, shutting down the global internet. So it's hard to say. I mean, in terms of immediate damage, the UN and World Health Organization can be pretty damaging, especially with UN with their climate agenda. But what happens is it's not so much as an external danger. It's the people we elect. They come from there. Half of Justin Trudeau's cabinet's been estimated to be World Economic Forum, or maybe higher, protégés.
Right.
The Prime Minister of Netherlands, Ruud, or whatever you say his name, is a protégé, a student of the Young Leadership program at the World Economic Forum. Well, that's the Netherlands, where they're shutting down modern agriculture, #1 meat exporter in Europe. They're trying to kill the idea of eating meat. They know what they're doing. And so people like Bill Gates, huge threat, buying up farmland. But it's hard to say which organization, the one with the most quickest damage and most power possibly could be the World Health Organization, because that would influence our own public health tyranny members, people like Anthony Fauci, CDC, who would then impose whatever the World Health wants. And that's what happened, and I detail that in the book. And as you know, your book detailed how we all just, like lemmings, followed China off the lockdown cliff, because we were told China had eradicated the virus and zero COVID, and that's the model for the world to follow, is lock down healthy citizens.
Which leads me to my next question, and I know our time grows short, so I don't know if we have, this may be the last question, but how to be optimistic about the outlook for American freedoms right now? Because, look, we did fold as a country. We put on the face mask. We kept our kids home from school. We listened to businesses tell us that it was the law to wear face masks when, of course, it wasn't. The vaccines and all that. What is the optimism for America then?
Well, my advice is gouge your eyes out and give up. And I've been giving that same the advice is fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So you were absolutely right. In fact, the UK House of Commons leader came out last year or 2 years ago now and said that he was amazed at how, quote, compliant the public was on COVID restrictions, and therefore it's now time to move to climate restrictions while everyone is essentially compliant. I think what's going to happen is I think we've established now that red states, at the very least, everything from Florida to Georgia to South Carolina, Texas, South Dakota, North Dakota, they would never lock down again in the face of any public health emergency. I'm pretty confident in saying that Republicans won't allow it. Politicians now will pay a price. That, of course, the other states still will lock down. And, of course, the other ones, the national, might still lock down. So I think people are aware. So, and I detail this in the book, is at every possible level. Refuse the mask, refuse the mandate, refuse to give up gas-powered cars, refuse to give up meat eating, refuse at every level that you can. And I detail how the parents at the lowest level of politics, the school board level, by willing to get arrested, by going in against critical race theory, by protesting the transgender ideology in their schools, and by fighting the COVID theater of masking and mandates and vaccines, they toppled the Democratic Party machine of Terry McAuliffe in Virginia and almost did it in New Jersey, had other victories at school board levels, and it so shook the National Democratic Party that they had focus groups, and this is as reported in the New York Times, and they ended up, because of these focus groups found out that their own base wanted to return to normal, presto, every major city from San Francisco, Boston, New York, Washington, Baltimore, Philadelphia lifted the vax and mask mandates by declaring the science had changed earlier this year, but in reality it was the political science that had changed. So we have to make it untenable for politicians to basically pay that lip service and the virtue signal to the green agenda, to electric car mandates, to solar and wind mandates, to demonizing fossil fuels, to declaring public health, to making you feel guilty by living your life. Your freedom is not infringing on someone else's health. That whole concept. We have to get people to fight back at every level, and we have to demand that the alleged party fighting for freedom against these kind of things, the Republican Party, gets the message, and we have to make it, so that they fight back as well. So that's, I have Václav Klaus, the former Czech president, lived under communism most of his life, directly comparing the Great Reset and what happened under COVID to communism. The idea they didn't want you to congregate, they wanted to keep you apart. They didn't call it social distancing, but it was the same idea. And so this is how we fight back. We have to resist at every level, and we have to challenge every narrative. And practically, we need serious emergency power reform at state level, federal level.
There you go.
We have to have criteria, and we have to have time limits, and at some point you have to have a vote. Like Biden should not be allowed to just keep extending this through. And also just the fact that they're getting a new vaccine under emergency authorization, a new booster. What COVID emergency is there at this point with a death toll lower than the flu and with, the Omicron, whatever the latest variant is, they're still getting these tests and justifying it on 8 mice to then foist it upon the public. Europe is wising up on a lot of these COVID. They're not, certain countries like Denmark aren't even allowing it. But we do need serious emergency power reform. To end with this, though, Joe Biden is set to declare a national climate emergency. Center for Biodiversity says it will give him 130 new executive wartime powers using things like the War Production Act. And he is going to go hog wild with that. And this will also, to some extent, extend to mayors, governors. They'll be able to have more thermostat controls, more gas-powered car controls, car-free cities. It's frightening, and this is how this started with Obama in earnest. Actually started under George Bush, but the idea is the Chinification of America. You can't get it through Congress, just issue executive orders. But now it's gone way beyond that. Now they want to govern by emergency order, and in the book I detail, going back to the Roman Republic, through the Middle Ages, through 1930s Germany, through even the Patriot Act and 9/11 emergency power, the greatest abuses of government against its citizens have come during times of emergency declaration. So that is our number one thing we have to stop. We have to bring back a democracy.
Yeah, people just have to fight. I mean, honestly, that's what it comes down to, right? People have to just determine that they want to save their liberties in America. And, your book is amazing. The Great Reset, Global Elites and the Permanent Lockdown. Bestseller on Amazon in several categories, I believe. Forward by Sebastian Gorka, so kudos to you for that. Marc, thank you so much for the work you do. You're brilliant. You nail it. And I'm so happy that you had time to chat with me on Bold and Blunt.
Well, thank you so much, Cheryl. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Once again, the book is The Great Reset, Global Elites and the Permanent Lockdown. And guess what? I have a new book out called Lockdown, The Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom. It speaks to similar issues that Marc puts out in his book. I suggest you pick up his book and my book at the same time. Read them together. Don't let the left deceive you into thinking the Great Reset is just a conspiracy theory, nothing to see here. It's not. At the very least, go to weforum.org and educate yourself on what the left is putting out in its own words. I want to thank you for listening. Remind you that if you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at washingtontimes.com, where you can also sign up for my 3 times a week newsletter. Just go to washingtontimes.com, scroll to the bottom of the page, the newsletter section, click on it, find my name, and subscribe. You will get my newsletter 3 times a week in your email box, Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays, right in time for lunch hour. And what it contains are all my commentaries that I write all day long at the Washington Times, as well as my twice weekly Tuesday and Thursday Bold and Blunt podcast, which, one more quick mention, you can get wherever podcasts are offered. Thank you for listening. Thank you if you already subscribed. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.